1712. German naturalist Engelbert published his own work. Exotic novelty. Politics. Physical medicine. Through this book, Europeans first came into contact with soybeans. As a result, 2 hostages were imprinted into the brain. 1. Soybeans are produced in Japan. 2. Soybeans are side dishes used as seasonings. In fact, soybeans are native to China. It was not until the 2nd century BC that Chinese soybeans were spread by land, and they were spread to Korea and Japan. At the same time, soybeans are also one of the traditional Chinese grains, and were once active on the Chinese dining table as a staple food. Nowadays, we rarely treat soybeans as a staple food, but choose to eat byproducts of soybeans, tofu, soy sauce, soy milk, etc. The identity of soybeans has changed from a staple food to a side dish. So, why has soybeans become the staple food of Chinese people? Why did it later change from a staple food to a side dish? This is not familiar with me, I am a gun. Today we eat soybeans, a bowl of boiled soybeans, and a bowl of bean leaf soup. This soybean set meal was called bean rice in the pre-Qin period. Although the Central Plains had already collected rice, millet, sorghum, wheat and grains at that time, it was possible to summon Shinong. Although soybeans were ranked at the end of the grains, if the staple food capacity values were analyzed one by one, soybeans were definitely the quadrilateral warrior with the highest combat power. The so-called quadrilateral warrior corresponds to the characteristics of soybean crops that are cold-resistant, drought-resistant, high-yield, and high nutrition. First of all, soybean crops are not delicate and have no harsh characteristics on the growth environment, that is, they can overcome the triple debuff of cold, drought and poor soil. As long as it is not the extreme cold environment, it can be planted in China from 23 degrees north latitude to 45 degrees north latitude, and can survive even in arid areas with insufficient precipitation. Even if the soil is poor, it is okay. Soybeans will take action and make the land fertile. We all know that nitrogen plays an important role in plant stem and leaf growth and fruit development. Using nitrogen fertilizer on the land to increase yield is also a routine operation in modern agriculture. After legumes, including soybeans, take root in the soil, rhizobia in the soil will enter the root from the root hairs and establish a symbiotic relationship with soybeans. Soybeans will provide rhizobia with a suitable nitrogen fixation environment and the carbohydrates necessary for growth. In return, rhizobia will form many rhizobia at the roots of soybeans. Each of these small nodules is a miniature nitrogen fertilizer plant that converts nitrogen in the air into nitrogen fertilizer for soybean growth. This is also reflected in the text. As we said before, vegetables are the general term for legumes, and when we trace it back, vegetables are the original way of writing vegetables. Shuoenjiezi records, vegetable beans are like the form of vegetable beans growing. The pictographic meaning of vegetables deciphered in Shuoen exemplary by Wang Yun, a philosopher in the Qing dynasty. The middle is the land, and the trees connecting the upper and lower represent soybean plants. One above is the stem plant that grows towards the sun, and the other below represents the root system. The tree dots around the root system symbolize fine roots, and the potatoes with beans on top are the root tumors. At the same time, an empiricism was also proposed: the more nodules, the more abundant soybeans will be. This means that when the word vegetable was created more than 3,000 years ago, our ancestors had already realized the characteristics of soybeans' autonomous nitrogen fixation. Soybeans that can independently fix nitrogen can be said to be the king of the 5 grains in terms of yield. For the same land, they can collect 5 to 10 chunks per mu. This number is about 4 times the harvest of millet among the best among the other 4 grains. In addition, soybeans are also a highly nutritious food. It can be judged from the protein content of 35.1% and the lipid content of 17.8% that soybeans are animal meat disguised as plants. How exaggerated is this number? The fat content of pork is barely the same as that of soybeans, and the protein content is 7.76% lower than that of soybeans. You should know that during the Qin and Han dynasties, protein and oil were a precious nutrient for civilians who rarely ate carnivorous. Soybeans not only fill this nutritional gap, but the 18 amino acids of soy protein contain all the amino acids needed by the human body, and the proportion of these amino acids is close to the ideal proportion required by the human body. The quadrilateral warrior soybean, which is cold-resistant and drought-resistant, high-yield and highly nutritious, became the staple food for Chinese people to survive the fierce new year in that era when humans were helpless in the face of natural disasters. Strangely, the proportion of soybean crop planting area during the Han Dynasty had dropped from 25% during the Warring States period to 8%. The records of soybeans as the staple food in the literature have gradually disappeared, while at the same time, side dishes such as soybean paste, tofu, soy sauce, etc., which are based on soybeans as raw materials, have been born in a concentrated manner. So why did soybeans gradually become a side dish after the Han Dynasty? We have been emphasizing before that, as a staple food, the difference between a quadrilateral warrior and a hexagonal warrior is that it has two fatal disadvantages. One is that it has an unpleasant smell of beans. The other is that it is bloating and indigestion after eating too much. If soybeans are unpalatable, there may be audiences who have to object. No, the soybean stewed pork trotter soup tastes so good. Friends who often cook can also recall that when cooking with soybeans, do you have to soak them in advance? This is because the soybeans we buy are basically hot-dried soybeans, with the purpose of removing the original bean smell that is difficult to swallow. However, the bean smell is an undefined taste. Different growth stages and different cooking methods will cause the bean smell to change dynamically. For example, the concentration of these four volatiles in the early stage of soybeans is high, so let's talk about some fruity aroma. By the end of maturity, these four concentrations gradually decrease, but these six concentrations exceed, with a strong green smell. In addition, the large amount of lipids contained in soybeans will be exposed to light and processing temperature during storage and cooking. Maillard's reaction effects. Oxidation occurs to generate a series of unpleasant odors. Specifically during the Qin and Han dynasties, the flavor of Chinese bean rice was about the same as the drooling paint-drowned fish. At this time, there may be another audience who will object. No, edamame is the youth version of soybeans. The soybean ripening rate is only 60% to 80%. The picked water is boiled and eaten with tender and sweet bean rice. If edamame is used to cook, won't the unpalatable problem be solved? That's right, the problem of edamame was solved, but then new problems emerged. The moisture content of stored edamame is close to 70%, which is almost 7 times that of adult versions of soybeans. This means that edamame will rot if it is left for a few days, and it cannot be stored for a long time like soybeans for disaster prevention. Do you swallow unpalatable soybeans for survival, or die because of greed for the fresh sweetness of edamame? For Chinese ancestors who advocate edible rationalism, the answer is obvious. In addition, as a staple food, soybeans have a lower carbohydrate and calories than other grains. This means that you have to show off your soybeans if you want to get enough survival energy. But it's okay if soybeans are unpalatable. The key is that eating too much this thing can easily cause bloating and indigestion. Don't eat too much beans, as they are prone to farting. This is a life experience that many people learn from their elders since childhood. This is because the few carbohydrates in soybeans, about 50% of which are called raffinose and cedrosose. This soy oligosaccharide is not easily digested and decomposed by the digestive enzymes of the intestines. Instead, it can be used by bifidobacterium in the intestines, which will cause indigestion and intestinal flatulence in the stomach during this process. Our ancestors were always troubled by the fishy smell of soybeans and their spleen and stomach. It was not until the Han Dynasty that soybeans were gradually moved out of the staple food circle due to the emergence of competitors. According to historical climatology research, the Han Dynasty was in the third warm period after the end of the Dali Ice Age. With abundant rainfall, many plant crops from the southern subtropical regions went north, such as loquat, lychee, longan, and banana. This kind of fruit can be settled in Guangdong. The growing area of bamboo even exceeds 46 degrees north latitude. There are two types of staple foods that have ushered in their planting outbreak. Rice, a crop that likes warmth and water, also expands its planting area from south to north due to climate dividends. At the same time, a series of measures such as water conservancy, vegetable channels, and water conservation and moisture conservation in the Qin and Han dynasties gradually solved many problems after wheat was localized in China. As a result, the single-acre yield and planting area of wheat are also rushing upwards like a rocket. The increase in total wheat production has invisibly opened the door to the Chinese pasta world, triggering a response to the increase in wheat consumption population, the popularization of stone mills, and wheat flour. The wheat rice that was originally thorny was replaced by steamed, cooked, fried and fried pasta. After the Han Dynasty, with the popularity of wheat and rice cultivation, the staple food function of soybeans was gradually weakened. By the Tang Dynasty, soybeans had been regarded as miscellaneous grains. Then when corn and potatoes were introduced in the American crops in the Ming Dynasty, soybeans even withdrew from the ranks of grain crops and were regarded as a vegetable genus. However, soybean did not leave the Chinese dining table. Soybeans were placed in the staple food circle and could only be considered a quadrilateral warrior, but in the staple food circle, they turned into a 720-degree hexagonal warrior without dead corners. People in the Han Dynasty unlocked the new way to eat soybeans, braised and fermented. If the soybeans are soaked and submerged into the slurry and boiled, and then put salt into the slurry, colloid accumulation and deposition will occur, and white tofu will precipitate. The soybean polysaccharides that cause indigestion have reduced dissolution during the production process of grinding and filtration due to their water solubility. Similarly, the content of polysaccharides in soy products such as soy milk, soy sauce, and soy sauce will also decrease. Therefore, eating non-fermented soy products with tofu as the core can not only obtain high protein but also avoid indigestion. As for the fishy smell of soybeans, mix it with salt water and grind it, then put it in a place with flour and ferment it into soy milk. Protein coexists with starch, which helps the reproduction of microorganisms. Soy protein is broken down into amino acids and nucleotides under the action of microorganisms and their enzymes, giving the soy sauce an umami flavor. Soy polysaccharides that cause indigestion can also be degraded to dextrin, maltose, and glucose by amylase secreted by microorganisms, adding sweetness to soy milk. This means that through fermentation, the soybeans that drown fish scented with paint will evolve into fresh, sweet, salty, and fragrant bean paste. If bean paste is experienced during the sun and night dew, it will condense into soy sauce. The traditional Chinese diet is divided into two systems, rice and vegetables, which correspond to staple foods of grains and starch, and side foods of vegetables, meat and eggs. Nowadays, we rarely see soybeans in our rice bowls, but they are everywhere in the dish: bean curd, tofu, dried bean curd, bean peel, thousand sheets, vegetarian chicken. When Chinese people in the mountains and the south and the north of the sea, they cannot cook without bean paste whether they are cooking or mixing cold dishes. Soybeans that have precipitated into China's thousand-year dietary system have also filled the meat gap brought about by the endowment of ancient China's agricultural resource, planting and animal husbandry to a certain extent, and maintained the dietary balance of the Chinese people. Even in the current period of transformation of the food system, the protein we need is mainly obtained from animal food, but high proportion of soybean meal is added to these daily feeds for livestock and poultry that are served on the table. Today, when the golden soybean oil from the northeast plain soaks the sweet noodle sauce from Chiluland, when the thousand-bean fragrance of Jiangnan swept the storm, the Punang bean sauce from Kaohsiung. From Chimin's fermented bean curd method to modern protein isolate technology, the 3,000 years of soybean edible history shows us the ultimate code for soybean survival, gaining new life through continuous transformation. Whether now or in the distant future, soybean rice, tofu, soybean paste, soybean meal, soybeans will always accompany the Chinese people in a direct or indirect form.